my gorgeous! Oh yeah, that is completely you. So let me warmly welcome you to a new video. Last week I showed you how to clean your iron, and this week just side note, I'm actually filming all of this on December 24th. It's Christmas Eve, and I'm ready to give my husband one of his Christmas gifts. He has asked me to make him new shirts with a custom pattern that I made from an extant garment. So I made him this shirt with a few assorted masks. So for this week's video, I'm showing you a tutorial on how to sew a men's shirt. I've already shown you how to make the shirt pattern on December 23rd. If you want to know how to make the pattern, please go look at that video. This week, I'm showing you how to sew the actual garment. It's a very interesting process. Honestly, I was a bit scared at first because shirting looked really complex and hard to me. But after doing my first mock-up and after doing this is the first shirt I've ever done, and it turned out really good. This really isn't as hard as I thought it would be. So without further ado, let's get to work.
The first thing I need to work on is my back panel. I'm sewing the darts by hand basting them and then machine sewing them, but most professional shirt makers are indeed able to run them freehand straight on the machine. I personally prefer making sure I got an exact shape before I run it on the machine. The darts have been pressed towards the center, and the two yoke pieces then need to be sewn to the back piece, one on each side of it, right sides facing each other. I'm doing something I've never done before here, which is sewing the three pieces together without pinning or basting anything beforehand. You can see me adjusting the layers in between each time I press the machine pedal. This was definitely a test of my abilities. The next step is the shoulder seams. I'm first doing them on one side of the yoke, attaching the front bodice pieces to it as a short, straight seam. It's very easy to machine stitch this one without pinning anything. Attaching the second yoke piece at the shoulder seams is a tricky affair, so please pay attention. First, I'm rolling the front bodice pieces outwards like so. I'm making them as narrow as I can. And next, I'm rolling the back bodice piece upwards very tightly. The whole shirt is rolled in a long, narrow tube. This allows me to grab the second yoke piece, roll it around the tube like so, and bring these shoulder seams together on the other side. Once both shoulder seams are done, I can unroll the bodice panels from their little yoke tube, which encases all the shoulder blades and shoulder seam allowances between the two yoke pieces. After I've given the garment in progress a good press, I'm taking it to the sewing machine where I'll top stitch all my seams on the yoke side. This will ensure a clean, crisp finish. I'm taking a moment here to press the button and buttonhole plackets at the center front. These will be secured much later, so I'm pinning them for now. While I'm at it, I'm also pressing the topmost 1/4 inch of the sleeve. I decided to try and sew my sleeve in like professional shirt makers do, straight on the machine without pinning or basting anything. The idea is to line up the bodice edge with the sleeve folded edge and sew a 1/4 inch away from that meeting point. Honestly, I did an okay job. My seam didn't exactly match with what was marked on the fabric, but it looked fine, and most of all the pieces matched. So I decided to keep it as it was, but I definitely shall hand baste my sleeves the next time. The next step seems over the top, but I swear this is how many professional shirt making videos on the internet told me to do. So I'm taking fabric glue, in this case an old tube of Sew No More that we inherited from my late mother-in-law, and I'm literally gluing the folded sleeve seam allowance over on the bodice, all around the arm's eye, and I'm focusing on keeping the bodice all nice and flat. This way, I'll be able to top stitch the seam line at about a ½ inch from the edge from the right side of the garment without worrying that the seam allowance underneath shift and run out from under there. Once the whole arm's eye has been top stitched at about a ½ inch, I'm top stitching it again closer to the edge, this time all around like all the other seams. Once the sleeves have been set, the side seams are ready to be sewn. There are a few things to be noted here. First, the front seam allowance is a ¼ inch, while the back is a ½ inch. This is so that the back seam allowance will fold over the front one, creating a flat felled seam. We'll get there in a minute. But for now, the important thing is to match the underarm first, sewing all the way down the sleeve. And then starting at the underarm again and sewing all the way down to the bottom of the garment. After that, I'm taking it to the ironing board where I'll press the first ¼ inch of the back seam allowance towards the front. And then I'm taking it straight to the machine where I'll top stitch this fold in place, creating a flat felled seam. I have a few notes about this move. First, I'm sewing this flat felled seam from the inside because that's where my seam allowances are at. But the thing is, machine stitching is much better looking from the needle side than it is from the bobbin side. Because of the way I'm sewing now, the bobbin side will unfortunately show from the right side of the garment. To correct this, I should have sewn my side seams wrong sides facing each other instead of right sides facing each other. I would have then been able to press my seam allowances into a flat felled seam that I would have then sewn from the right side of the garment. It's not a huge mistake though, and it doesn't really show unless you're looking for it, so it is what it is. The next thing of interest is the fact that I've started at the bottom here, and when I progressively get down the sleeve, it gets harder and harder to keep fabric from running under the needle. Just work an inch or so at a time, pulling everything else taut and out of the way as you go. You're gonna get there, I promise. I chose to finish my bodice hem next, to get it out of the way so the edges won't fray. I'm turning the first ¼ inch inward, securing it in place with a running stitch. Then I'm turning the next ¼ inch inwards, but this time whip stitching it as I go. There is a slit at the bottom of the cuff with a tiny bias slit at the top towards the back. I'm cutting that open. Then I'm taking it to the ironing board where I'll press this little edge inwards twice by about 1/8 of an inch or less. I'm also taking my sleeve placket piece and I'm pressing its small tab here as well as its long edge there. Back at my sewing machine, I'm stitching the wrist slit edge that has been rolled, and then I'm aligning the sleeve placket with the slit. This is the inside of the sleeve now. I'm aligning that folded little tab with the top of the slit here, and I'm sewing it with a ¼ inch seam allowance. This allows me to flip that bit to the outside of the garment where I need to align that previously pressed fold with the machine seam I just made. I pinned it in place so it doesn't move while I press this into its final shape. My goal here is to give this little edge here a pointed shape. It's best to let the fabric cool in between each fold to make sure it keeps its shape. When it's got a shape I'm happy with, I'm pinning it in place and I'm taking it back to the sewing machine where I'll top stitch this whole bit in place, starting with the bottom edge and making my way all around this little pointed extension. The cuff in itself is made of two main fabric layers. One is a single layer of fashion fabric, and the other is a layer of fashion fabric that has been interfaced on the inside sans seam allowance. I need to hold these two pieces together and stitch them around this edge leaving the bottom open and making sure that I'm not sewing a single stitch on that bottom seam allowance. Once this is done, I'm clipping the corners, flipping the cuff right side out, and I'm giving it a good press. Somehow I have no footage of this, but I've also pressed the interfaced bottom seam allowance inwards. The next step is quite tricky because it requires a bit of fudging around with pleats to get a correct match. There are pleats marked out on the bottom of the sleeve, right where it meets the cuff. There are 3 pleats on each sleeve. I have to play around with their size until the whole wrist circumference matches with the cuff width. Once I'm very sure it matches, I'm stay stitching that wrist seam to hold the pleats in place. I'm then inverting the garment again, working from the inside of the sleeve. I'm sewing the unfolded cuff edge, that's the one without any fusible interfacing, to the wrist. Once that is done, I can put the garment right side out again, and I'm pinning the folded cuff edge right over the seam line I just did, pinning it in place. I'm top stitching the whole cuff edge, giving it a clean, crisp finish and hiding all the raw edges between the layers. We're very close to the finish line now, with only the collar, buttons and buttonholes left to do. To build the collar, I'm marking the fold lines on this single layer of fashion fabric, and then I'm machine stitching that line. That'll give me a clear line on the right side of the fabric, which makes it very easy to press. I'm adding the collar tips to the folded collar layer, holding them in place for now with wonder clips. These collar tips need to be sewn around the seam allowances. This will create a little pocket at both collar ends. I'm then taking my collar pattern piece and I'm transferring the seam lines for the collar stays pockets. The collar stays are the little pointy, often white pieces of plastic that are put in shirt collars to make them stiffer. I'm basically top stitching that fold line, stopping at the first seam line I just marked, turning to follow it. I'm then moving around the corner and I'm going down that other parallel line. Then I'm stay stitching the rest of that fold line, leaving only that narrow little pocket opening. The collar stays layer is complete and is ready to be attached to the interfaced layer. It's actually double interfaced, one interfacing with a 1/4 inch seam allowance and one sans seam allowance. So I'm holding these 2 layers together and I'm machine stitching them all around except the bottom. I'm stopping my needle 1 single stitch before I reach the first of 2 very sharp corners. I'm making sure my needle is down and I'm placing a bit of polyester thread in front of it, right between my collar layers. One end of the thread is in the collar, while the other one lays to the other side of the needle, like so. I'm then having my machine make 1 more single stitch right into that sharp corner. I'm grabbing my loose polyester thread again, then I'm wrapping it in front of the needle, tucking it between the collar layers with the other end. I'm turning the collar so it'll sew the next part in the correct direction, and then I'm sewing all the way to the next corner, where I'll do the exact same thing with the polyester thread and the needle. Once I've clipped the corners and flipped the collar, I can then pull on those loose threads to help create that sharp tip. Side note, turns out the thread I used was old and brittle, so I really couldn't pull hard without breaking it, so the tips aren't as sharp as I'd hoped them to be. Next time I'll use a newer, stronger thread. Once everything is well in place, I'm top stitching that outer edge at about 1/16 of an inch. The collar is mounted on a collar stand, which too consists of two main layers, a single fashion layer and an interface layer. I'm matching the center of those two layers with the center of my collar, pinning everything in place, and I'm taking that straight to the machine where I'll stitch that in two movements, starting from the center. Like I did with the cuff, I'm being extra cautious not to sew over the bottom seam allowance at all, as to be able to press that upwards. I'm then flipping the whole thing and I'm giving it a good press as well. I'm now ready to mount it on the shirt with the single fashion layer together with the outside of the garment. I'm matching the corners first, of course, and then I'm easing the two bits together. Before I machine stitch that one, though, I'm basting it by hand. This makes it way easier for me to machine stitch it without worrying that I'm pulling too hard or not hard enough on something which would end up not matching correctly. Next, I'm flipping that collar to the inside of the garment and I'm pinning that previously folded edge right over the seam line I just did. To secure everything in place, I'm top stitching the collar stand all around 1/16 of an inch away from the edge. Off camera, I've done my buttonholes and the shirt is currently in the washing machine. I like to clean all the pencil off before the next and last step. Meanwhile, let me demonstrate how I make a buttonhole using the buttonhole setting on my sewing machine. For the stitch setting, circled in red, I'm choosing the buttonhole stitch shown here. For the stitch length, in the green circle, I'm choosing the buttonhole length shown on the dial with the same drawing. For the stitch width, in the blue circle, I'm choosing a rather wide stitch, so I'm going at 5 out of 6 here. I'm also using this foot, conveniently called a buttonhole foot. It has a little handle at the left here, which slides open and shut according to the width you want for your buttonhole. You may insert one of your buttons on that little slide, which will automatically calculate the needed length. I'm taking a bit of cabbage here for the demonstration, so first I'm pulling down that little lever here at the left of the foot. I'm laying the fabric underneath, and on the real garment I'd take my time for this to be sure the buttonhole lands exactly where it needs to. I'm bringing my foot down, and then I'm pushing that little lever once towards the back. You should hear a little mechanism kind of click there. When I'm pressing the pedal, the sewing machine will start running its buttonhole program. Alright, the shirt has been washed and pressed now, and I'm ready to open the buttonholes. I'm pinning each of them lightly on each side with the fabric glue, and after it's dried, I can open them up. I'm using a seam ripper and some embroidery scissors for that. Once the buttonholes are opened, I'm marking my buttons and I'm sewing them on. I couldn't find buttons the same color as this fabric, so I opted for clear buttons. I'm not putting a button on a cuff because my husband prefers wearing cufflinks. After one last good press, the shirt is complete. I hope you've enjoyed. If you did, please give this video a big thumbs up. If you want more crafty content, subscribe to this channel and you can check out my Instagram. I shall put a link in the description box below. I love you all very much and I will see you next Wednesday. Bye!